Good morning, everyone. Suzanne Taylor-King here for another episode of Unlock Your Way with STK. And I am honored to have a conversation today with Oakland McCulloch, 23-year Army veteran, now retired and stepping into for the last how many years speaking and coaching?
Yeah, a couple years now. Yeah.
Yeah. You stood out to me. I can't even remember how we originally got connected, but I heard you talk and I said this is somebody I love military mindset. I love the athlete mindset, and you're really this unique combination of all of that.
Right.
I'm going to brag on you a little bit with not only your career, your military awards, but also teaching and mentoring other people. Really honorable.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Suzanne. I look at it as my responsibility. I tell leaders all the time, it is your responsibility to help develop, coach, teach, mentor that next generation of leaders because we are going to reap what we sow. I
Yeah.
promise. And if we don't do a good job, we deserve what we get.
Yeah. Well, I think my dad was in the army only for about 4 years, and but I think his takeaway was really that do unto others attitude. Also, the strictness that I was raised with, from make your bed to don't complain. And I don't know, there's something really foundational about those military ways. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so I think one of the benefits of being in the service, whether you do it for 2 years, 30 years, 40 years, and I just talked to somebody the other day who had 42 years in the
Wow.
service. Wow, it's just amazing to me, almost double what I did. One of the benefits is you get some self-discipline, and there is a difference between discipline and self-discipline, and you also just learn how to make things happen.
Mm.
It, one of my favorite talks I ever listened to, and I got to do it in person. It was an honor to listen to General Hal Moore. One of the things he said was, "Life isn't like baseball.
Mm.
It's not three strikes and you're out." He said, "If you try something and it doesn't work, try something else. And if that doesn't work, try something else." And he said, "And just keep trying until it works." And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that we learn in the military because you can't give up. That you got to keep trying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what attracted me to Stoic philosophy so much was just that grit and resilience and, you know, fall 7, rise 8
That's
theory.
right.
And so many times we see people, especially in the online space, and most of my clients are in the online space. It's so easy to look at someone else and think they're an overnight success,
Yeah.
or it didn't take, and oh, it's easy for them, you know and it gosh, I just think it's not easy for anyone, but some people make it look easy, and that's
That's
one
right.
of the things you do. You make
Well,
it look easy.
yeah, well, I think, I think a lot of it has to do with your attitude,
Mm,
and I think I'm a believer that it's not about me. It's about the people I have the privilege to lead. And I try to always keep that in mind. And I try to
mm,
treat people in the right way. And, somebody told me the other day, they said, "You're always so calm." And I said, "On the outside, maybe." I
yeah,
said, but that all comes from, if you want to be a leader, then you have to set the example. And if you're all panicky and you're all upset and yelling and screaming, then the people that you're leading feed off of that. And
mhm,
if you're calm, then they'll feed off of that.
yeah. Yeah, you do. You have, like, an energized tranquility about you. Listening to a couple, talks you gave on other podcasts, it's very centered and grounded and comes from a place of wisdom. What's the secret to that?
So I think one of the things that I emphasize a lot is that you never stop learning. You know, your professional development, first of all, is on you. You know, an organization that you're a part of should have a professional development program. I'm a huge advocate of that. But in the first place, it's all on you. You got to want to professionally develop. And so I think that is part of it. I just never stop learning. I read, I listen to people. You know, I don't care how long you've been doing whatever it is you're doing, you can always get better. You can always learn something new. And that's the philosophy I've always had. And that was kind of ingrained in me and with my father. Growing up, my father had this thing called the 75% rule. And he said, son, if you can't do something better than 75% of the people doing it, then you need to do one of two things. Figure out how to get better at it, or go do something else, because obviously it doesn't matter to you.
Wow. Wow. Did that apply to grades as well?
It
Uh,
did.
that was 75 was my cutoff of what I was allowed to
Yeah.
bring home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't a pleasant day if I brought home something below a B.
Mm. Yeah. I remember going to college to be a dental hygienist. That's where I started. And there was no D. You had to get an A, B, or C, or you got an F, and you had
That's
to
right.
do whatever you were doing over again in order to get an A, B, or C. And I remember walking in that first day and they explained the grading system. And it didn't phase me at all because that was
Um,
already the expectation that I grew up with. But I remember some of the other people thinking, "Oh, how am I going to do that? How am I like that really scared some of the students."
yeah.
And I'd love for you to speak a little bit about fear because you faced war and conflicts and all kinds of things in your career, and I'm sure you've faced things in your personal life. How does that fear really come up for you, and how do you move past it?
Yeah. So anybody who tells you they don't have a fear of something is lying to you. You know, I think I've probably only known three people that I could truly say seem like they were fearless, and all three of them are dead. Um,
I don't know if that's a sign or not.
yeah, well, I think it is. I think fear is a good thing. It's something that keeps us from doing dumb things or from doing things that we probably shouldn't do. So I don't think fear is a bad thing. The thing you have to get to yourself is to overcome some fears. And I think part of that comes from a purpose. If you know what you're really doing and it's worth doing, then you can deal with that fear a little bit better. And I think that has, I think you can use fear as a tool to encourage yourself, to keep pushing yourself to overcome that. I read somewhere one time, and I can't remember who said it, but they said, the fears you don't face today become your limits tomorrow.
Mm.
So if you don't face the fears that you have, then they're going to limit you in whatever it is that you want to do.
I love that because I think I've used it as an indicator that I'm on the right track, out of my comfort zone, right? If it
Yeah,
doesn't scare me a little, and positive psychology kind of teaches to reframe it as excitement.
that's right. Yeah. I'm the same way with stress. I think
Mhm.
stress is a good thing. It shows you're doing something worth doing. If
Yeah.
you don't have any stress in your life, I question whether or not you're doing very much.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes to that challenge factor. I
Yeah,
love to challenge other people just like I love to challenge myself. Like how much can I learn about that? How much better can I do? And obviously, you've had that same attitude for a long time. What's the secret to learning more faster? I ask a lot of people this question. How do they learn? How do you absorb information?
So everybody's a little different. That's one of the first things they teach you when you go to a teaching class where they're going to teach you how to be an instructor, especially in the military. They say, everybody learns differently. Some people want to read. Some people want a lecture. Some people want video, or listen, like
Mhm.
podcasts, whatever. I prefer to sit in person and listen to somebody if I can. That's just the way I always learned. But
Yeah.
I'm starting to get to the point where I'm using podcasts as well. And doesn't even have to be a video podcast. It's something I can put in my ears.
Mhm.
And I'm starting to pick up on that a little bit more, talk about out of your comfort zone. That was a little bit for me. But it is an easy way to do it and a quick way to do it. And it's something you can do driving. You can do it. I fish a lot. I love to fish. I can do it out fishing. Whatever I want to do, I can listen to a podcast, and I can pick up things that way. But
Yeah.
my preferred method is in person listening. And, I take lots of notes. I'm a note taker. Even today, like last week, I was the closing speaker for the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police in Columbus, Georgia. And I sat through, I don't know, 3 or 4 breakout session, waiting for my turn the last day to
Mhm.
close the conference. And I'm sitting there taking notes. And somebody said, "Aren't you one of the speakers?" I said, "Yeah, it doesn't mean I can't learn from you."
Yeah. 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 I love that. I think podcasts are great because you can, even if it's a topic you already think you know about, you can listen a little faster, like on 1.5 speed,
Right.
and pick up nuggets. I can't tell you how many times I've been out walking, listening to a topic, and picked up something and had to jot it down in my phone.
Yeah.
Really, really helpful. But I'm a visual learner.
Okay.
So seeing someone demonstrate or do something or even give a talk in person, something about watching the other person really drives me.
Yeah,
I
me
can
too. I mean,
absorb.
I'm that way too. And I grew up working on farms, and it was always a farm. And I wasn't a farmer. My family wasn't a farmer, but I grew up working on farms as a kid, and so it was all new to me. And every time a farmer would do something, I say, "So show me how to do that." And it was he'd show me, and I'd do it, and then I knew it. But I'm that way too. I love the in person
Mhm.
interaction. To me, and it goes back to communication, face-to-face communication, which is a lost art today, unfortunately, with a lot of the young people.
Mhm.
Um, it's so important because you can pick up on body language. You can pick up on, I can, when I tell somebody to do something, when I was a leader, I loved to look in their eyes. I could tell whether or not they understood what I was asking them to do.
Yeah.
You don't get that over
Yeah.
text or email or phone calls. I mean, to me, it's just the face-to-face communication is just so important.
Yeah, I agree. I think facial cues, I'm notorious for I can't hide how I feel
Yeah, my wife tells me I can't
at
either.
all. And I think one of the cool parts about uh, being with someone in person is the full body language. How do they stand? How do they carry themselves? And how do they interact with other people? I know my dad used to talk about that a lot within the military. How do you interact with others is usually a good key
It
to
is.
not only your leadership. Do you agree with that?
I do, absolutely. I think, I and I learned this as a lieutenant. I was a general's aide, and during the first Gulf War, I was a one-star general's aide, and General Powell, who is still the most impressive man I've ever met in
Yeah.
person, um, he was coming to address all the generals. So we had a big circus tent, and it was a circus tent. just a huge tent out in the middle of nowhere in the desert. And all of these generals are out there, and all of us aides, here I was a lieutenant, and there were some captains and some majors, and
Mhm.
we went there with our generals to get them there, and we were all standing in the back. We didn't have a seat. We were all standing in the back of the tent, and all these generals, 1, 2, 3-star generals, are all talking, all really noisy. General Powell walks in. It goes deathly silent.
Wow, that's a good sign.
Everybody knew who was in charge,
Yeah.
and it wasn't them.
Mhm.
But the most impressive thing to me was this. At the end, all of us aides ran out and got the vehicles ready for the generals as they came out of the tent. General Powell walks out. He was the first general to walk out, and his vehicle was right there. He didn't walk to his vehicle and get in and leave. He walked over to a vehicle right next to him that had a corporal and a sergeant standing there, and he talked to them for about 15 minutes.
Wow.
Now, if I remember that, and that was 33 years ago, you can imagine that specialist and that sergeant will never forget that the rest of their lives. Didn't have to do that.
Right.
That's the show of a good leader, is that they can talk to anybody and want to talk to everybody.
Mm.
And so that just impressed me. And I tried to keep that all through my career. I don't care who you are. I want to talk to you and learn from you and get your opinion on stuff. As people buy my book, I always tell them, and they tell me they'll send me a message on LinkedIn or whatever and say, I bought your book. I say, I want your feedback. Send me feedback after you read it.
Mhm. I love that. I think I always say that focus is the really hot leadership skill right now. How can you, be more present, more attentive, not have your phone in your hands all
Yeah,
the time. But I would argue that it's a really close second with how you talk to people. Are you
I agree.
able to have conversations? Are you able to connect with people from a general all the way down to somebody who's homeless?
That's
You
right.
know, and how you treat people, I think needs to be a universal thing.
I agree. I agree. One of the things, and I spent 2 years running the day-to-day operations of a food bank after I
Mm,
retired from the Army. And uh, one of the things that I was adamant about, we were not doing a good job of serving the homeless community in the areas around where our food bank was. And so I started a program where once a month we went out where they were, in a community where there were homeless, and they could come very easily and gather where we were going to hand out the food. And I would spend, yeah, I didn't have to be there, but I did. I always made an effort to go there and
mhm.
to talk to them and just listen to them, which
Yeah,
is another lost communication skill, listening,
truly.
actually listening to people. But I think it's so important that you have that ability to talk to whoever
Mhm.
and to listen very well.
Yeah, yeah, truly a lost art
It
to be able
is.
to listen like
And we
that.
got, and that's one of the things I really emphasize in my talk is the communication skills, in all forms, but certainly listening and being able to talk to people.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about your book and not only who it's for, but where all of that came from about leadership
Yeah.
legacy. Where did all of that information come from?
So, I named it that for a reason, because I
Mhm.
believe that it is, leaders do need to leave a legacy. And I think legacy is a two-part thing. It's very small what you actually did in your organization. It does matter, because results do matter in the real world. But here's the problem: if you tie your legacy to what you did in your organization, then when the new boss comes in, the new leader takes over when you leave, and they change everything, then there goes your legacy. So it's not very long. in my opinion, the majority of your legacy is that next generation of leaders that you are helping to create, who are going to be around for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And then if you do it correctly, then they understand that it's their responsibility to create the next generation. So you got that generation you influenced, plus the ones they're going to do and the ones they're going to do. So your legacy could last the next 200 years if you do it right. So I've been giving this leadership presentation for, I don't know, 30 years. Obviously updated it, changed it a little bit every once in a while, but I've given it for a long time. And I always knew I wanted to write this book. And it's funny because I was always thinking, well, I'm going to write the book. And then my wife and I and her mother and two other people that live in our condo, we went to a motivational speaking / how do we revitalize the Catholic Church event at our church. And it was a 3-hour long event. This guy and he didn't talk for all 3 hours, obviously, but he's a great speaker. And he spoke for 45 minutes. We take a 15-minute break and did it like that. And every time he took a break, I went up and talked to him because he's doing what I wanted to do, get out and speak. And at the very end, we said our goodbyes and he started to walk away, and he turned around and he looked at me and he said, "Oak, have you written a book?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about it." He said, "Stop thinking about it and write it." Wow. So I went home that night and I wrote out the table of contents, and I started the next day. That was the 16th of February. And I published at 16th of February, 2020. And I published it on the 12th of February, 2021. So just under a year to write the book. And I thought I was writing it for young men and women. That was my initial audience that I thought would really benefit from it. And I think they have. And if you read the reviews of the book, I think I hit that mark. But then I had a 2-star Marine Corps general who I connected with on LinkedIn and had a couple of conversations, and he decided to buy my book and read it. And he sent me a message one day and he said, "Oak, I didn't learn a whole lot of new things. I learned a few new techniques." He said, "But what I really took out of your book was this." He said, "I'd be reading along and I'd read about something that you talk about. And I'd say to myself, I used to do that really well, and I don't do that so well anymore. Maybe I should dedicate some time to get back to doing that." And I think that's so important because, again, no matter how long you've been doing this, we all need a nudge every once in a while to kind of bring us back into reality that maybe we forgot something that helped make us successful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really the secret to success. All the books, all the classics, talk about high performance habits or the habits of the most successful. And I really think it's about remembering what you already know. Yeah. And that's repetition. That's, putting systems in place that if I'm doing this, then this happens. And just revisiting it every single day or at least once a week to, kind of form that direction of where you're going.
Well, I'm a huge believer in reflection because I don't believe you learn from experience, from things that happen. You learn from the reflection of things that happen.
Oh, yeah.
That is how you learn.
Yeah.
So I do 2 types of reflection after each major event. So like when I do a talk, I'll think about how I did it and could I do it better? Or, when I was in the Army, when we did a training event, we bring everybody together. Okay, this is what we were supposed to do. This is what we did. How do we get better at it? And I don't care, even if you're successful at something, you can still get better at it. But then I also have started a few years ago, I started a daily reflection. So every night before I go to bed, because I'm like you, I believe in routines inside of routines. I start my day every day the same way. I get up, I get my cup of coffee, I listen to the daily mass, I read a couple of chapters in the Bible, and I do my daily prayers.
Yeah, it's kind of like Groundhog Day at my house. So, you froze for a second.
Yeah. And then I do my journal because I keep a daily journal. And then I reflect on what I did that day. What did I do? How could I do it better? So that tomorrow I'm a little bit better than I was today.
Yeah. Yeah, that 1% better really makes a big needle mover in the long run. I love it. I love the idea of every day looks very similar. And that's not boring to me. I'm sure it's not to you. It's there's something, and I forget who said it, but there's something magical when your habits and your routines are actually the life that you want to live. That it actually becomes who you are rather than something you're striving to. And it looks like we lost Oakland there for a second. Let's see if he comes back. When we're talking about morning routines, habits of high performers, it doesn't have to be first thing in the morning, that routine. It can easily be, something you do later in the day. It has to work for you. I'm a firm believer in that routine has to work for you. And whether it's a combination of exercise, reflection, meditation, journaling, or some sort of reading, personal development, learning, all of those things go into my, power hours that I spend. All right, you're back. There
Yeah.
he's back. I talked a little bit while you were gone, just to fill our space since we're live, about that morning routine. And, whatever it looks like for you, it doesn't have to be first thing in the morning, but it's that combination of personal growth, a little bit exercise, a little bit of movement. Mine always includes a cup of coffee. Um, and, that reflection piece is so key. So key. Whether you're reflecting on learning or a mistake, it's truly how to take your mistakes and turn them into lessons and
Yes.
things that you do different in the
That's the only way you're going to learn from a mistake is to reflect on it.
yeah.
Again, what did I want to do? What happened, and how do I make up that difference?
Yeah.
Because that if you don't reflect on it, then it was just you don't learn from it. You don't figure out how to get better at it.
Right.
So
And do you think the same goes for negative
sure.
experiences or,
I think
um,
it, I had a friend who was a head football coach, and now he's the president of the university. But he used to say, you need to treat success the same way you treat failure.
hmm,
If you don't do something well, then you should reflect on it and figure out how to get better. And if you do something well, figure out how to get better at it.
yeah,
Because you can always do something better than you did it, even if you think it was successful.
I love that. I love it. Well, thank you so much for all these insights. I absolutely love your book. Uh, Huge fan of yours. How can my listeners get in touch with you and learn more about Oak?
Yeah, so I have a website, LTC Oak McCulloch at or .com, and I'm also so you can go on there, and on there it has my email address, my cell phone number, all the social media, and we connected on LinkedIn. That's how I do most of my social media is on LinkedIn. And if you want to send me a message, always happy to talk to people. I always try to make time for somebody who wants to connect with me on a Zoom meeting or over a phone call, and I would love to talk to you if you're interested.
I love it. Thank you so much for letting me be a fan. I appreciate you. And thank you for joining me on Unlock Your Way. And it was a pleasure to hear a little bit about your way today.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me on the show, Suzanne. I've been looking forward to it.
You're welcome.